you'd like to. So I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank my colleagues for joining us here. This is, from my standpoint, pretty simple, pretty basic. I view, both Senator Scott and I come from the private sector in business, and we're just used to having financial information and having a pretty disciplined process of reviewing it. Certainly before we agree to budgets in our business. The analogy would be that we as 535 members of Congress, we literally are the board of directors of the largest financial entity in the world, and we never talk numbers. I mean, you've got the number here, so it's not a fair question to ask, but I've been asking colleagues, I've been asking reporters, do you know how much the federal government spent last year? And most people I asked look pretty flummoxed. And I said, don't feel bad. It's not your fault. It's because we never talk about it. And so what I've done is I've just prepared this chart that just gives you some basic information. One number I want to point out is the $4.4 trillion. That's what we were spending totally, mandatory and discretionary spending in 2019 before the pandemic hit. Again, we recognized we had a pandemic, and Congress spent all kinds of money. In total, is about $6.4 trillion over 3 years more than the baseline of 2019 spending, 6.4. One of the things that surprised me as I put this chart together, breaking out discretionary versus mandatory spending, is I would have thought all that temporary COVID relief spending would have been discretionary. Once the pandemic passed, that spending would have just gone away. But in fact, only $1 trillion of the $6.4 trillion was allocated to discretionary, and $5.4 trillion was put into mandatory. I don't understand that. I'm not sure anybody understands that other than a few budget experts somewhere in the administration or maybe in the appropriations committees. I was shocked by that. The other thing I find pretty shocking, again, we really don't know, what the negotiators are negotiating from a standpoint of discretionary spending. That's what, the Omnibus or NECR is just talking about there. But we do know from the latest Treasury report from 2013 that in total, they're estimating 2023 spending will be $6 trillion. So you look at $6 trillion versus 4.4 in just that 4-year time period. Have we literally just increased the baseline spending from 4.4 to $6 trillion, a $1.6 trillion increase, about 36% increase? If that's the case, we'll never balance the budget. I'll throw out two more. I know this is a lot of numbers, but let me just throw a couple more out. Had we just grown the 4.4 by a factor of population growth plus inflation, that number should be about $4.8 trillion. Okay? Last year, the federal government raised in revenue $4.9 trillion. Isn't that kind of tantalizing from a standpoint that if we exhibited some financial discipline here, that we actually could have in sight a balanced budget? So we wouldn't keep growing our debt where all this deficit spending wouldn't continue to fuel inflation? One more little factoid to throw out there. Because of inflation, a dollar you all held at the start of the Biden administration is worth less than 88 cents today. We're talking about defense spending. Somewhere we've been told, we haven't seen it in writing, but we've been told about $858 billion worth of defense spending. That's only worth about $750 billion from the start of the Biden administration because of inflation. We're mortgaging our kids' future. This is killing us from a financial standpoint. It's got to stop. This process has to stop, which is why I supported Senator Lee's unanimous consent request yesterday to pass a CR. As much as we all hate CRs, the dysfunction they represent, but pass a CR that gets us into next year, not only to give a Republican House an opportunity to respond to the people that put them in place, but also to give us time to start understanding what these numbers actually mean. And so with that, I'd like to, introduce Senator Lee, who offered that CR request yesterday.
Just a few days from now, we'll be getting a bill. We'll be receiving spending legislation that we'll be expected to vote on. That spending legislation, I predict, will be 2,000 or 3,000 pages long. It'll spend over $1.6 trillion. And it has yet to be seen by anyone. You haven't seen it. We haven't seen it. In fact, we don't even have top-line numbers for it yet. We're told it's going to be a great deal, that we'd have to jump at it, that it would make a lot of sense. I struggle with that. I also struggle with the suggestion that this is an appropriate activity for Republicans to eagerly engage in at the precise moment when control of the House of Representatives has just flipped from the Democrats to Republicans, and will be flipping as of noon on January 3rd under the 20th Amendment. So I struggle with the suggestion that it makes sense to do that. Gone back as far as the mid-1950s, since 1954, we've seen control of the House flip from one party to the other 5 times, always in midterm elections during that time period. And during those midterm elections, when it flipped, there are exactly 0 examples of where the outgoing Congress passed a comprehensive spending bill in the lame duck session following that election, producing the majority shifting result. Why would we want to break with this precedent here? Why do that here? Look, the Democratic majority in the House and in the Senate that they've enjoyed for the last 2 years, along with the Democratic White House, has gotten a lot passed. They've accumulated about $4 trillion in new debt during that time period. They've spent an ungodly sum of money. They couldn't get their act together enough to pass a full fiscal year spending bill prior to the election. It was their choice. Not sure why they chose to do it that way, but they did. Having done that, I don't see any reason why Republicans should jump to their aid. Remember, they can't do this without Republican help, at least 10 Republicans in the Senate. I don't know why any Republican, let alone 10, would want to help them do that in that circumstance. There are those who say, well, it'll be too hard for Kevin McCarthy if we put these spending decisions on his shoulders as the new speaker early next year. Well, then I talked to Kevin McCarthy this morning after I heard a number of my colleagues saying that, and he said, nonsense. I'd love to do it. We need to do it. It would be malpractice for Republicans to pass an omnibus spending bill. And he said, in fact, I'm about to do a press conference on that. I don't know whether that's still going, but I think that started at about 1 o'clock. So he completely disagrees with it. Moreover, it stands to reason that a Republican House of Representatives would choose to allocate money differently, and I would hope a little more cautiously, than a Congress controlled by Democrats in both houses. It's boggling to me that we've got some members of our conference suggesting the opposite of that. That assumes facts not in evidence, and indeed contrary to evidence. In any event, as Senator Johnson mentioned, we went to the floor last night to offer up my proposed continuing resolution, a short-term spending measure that would move the spending deadline out, not by a week, but by a few weeks, allowing the next Congress, assuming nothing happens between now and then, to replace it, to pass spending legislation to cover the balance of the fiscal year. Notably, this would not preclude subsequent action on the omnibus. If we were to pass my proposed continuing resolution, the one extending the deadline by a few weeks, still doesn't preclude Congress from passing this omnibus or any omnibus during this Congress. Now, I'm against it. I'm against doing that for the reasons I've articulated, and especially because I haven't seen it. None of us have seen it. The public hasn't seen it. The press hasn't seen it. I assume some on K Street might have seen it, but that is part of the problem. And it doesn't preclude them from doing that. What it does do is it allows, if we were to enact that, if we were to adopt it, unfortunately the Democrats objected to it last night, but we have not seen the end of this. I'm going to keep offering it. If we were to adopt it, it would allow Congress to approach this omnibus spending package with the kind of clear-headed thinking that is required, and not under the extortive dual threat of shutdown and missing the Christmas holidays with family. That's the dual threat that this kind of spending practice puts us under. That's why I'm very leery of any effort to push forward a 1-week continuing resolution. Why? Well, because while it purports to, in its language, to stave off the risk of a shutdown, it in fact enhances, it substantially increases the threat of a shutdown. And that is not a bug, that is a feature. That's its purpose. The reason I feel comfortable saying that is that I've been here 12 years now. I've seen this happen year after year after year. You put an important must-pass bill, in this case a spending bill, without which the government will shut down. You put it right next to a scheduled recess. The more critical and valued the recess, the more potent the threat becomes. And then you move it even closer to that scheduled recess. In this case, a week closer to Christmas, taking it to December 23rd. That is designed by its very nature to carry out this extortive threat. You either vote for this or you're voting to shut down the government, and leaving as the only other alternative, other than a government shutdown at that point, working through the Christmas holidays and missing scheduled time with family. That's how they do this. So look, if Congress wants to pass an omnibus, it's not likely to get my vote. But we should at least allow our colleagues to do that with clear heads and not through this extortive threat.
Merry Christmas, America. The Democrats and big government Republicans will be offering you a Christmas tree. Christmas tree in Washington is a bill that has something on it for everyone. You won't know what it is until you get it. You won't be able to read it until it's done. But it will happen, because the only thing that invariably happens in Washington is they will get together to spend money. Democrats and big government Republicans every year pass a budget. But it's a budget that, or a spending bill that has no budget. It'll be a spending bill in which everything is glommed together in one bill. It'll be a spending bill thousands of pages long, and no one will have read it. No one will have encompassed the entire bill, and it'll be given with only hours to read it, and then there'll be a reversal of blame. The blame won't attach to the people who, frankly, I wouldn't put in charge of running a Minute Mart because of their lack of business sense. It won't attach to people who cobbled together a multi-thousand-page bill in the dead of night, didn't show it to anyone, and put it forward. They will say, no. If you vote no, you are for shutting down the government. I frankly am not for shutting down the government, but I'm frankly for spending less money and accumulating less debt. As Senator Johnson said, we're the largest financial entity in the United States. I don't know some guy who owns, or some woman who owns 3 gas stations and a Minute Mart that doesn't have a budget and doesn't have outlays and doesn't have a plan for how they're going to do the spending. They don't cobble it together and say to the board of directors, oh, here it is, you can read it after you pass it. So this is a nightmare way to run the government. I won't participate in it, and I will tell them that it's a rotten, no good way to run a country. That's all I've got to say.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. So I'm in business. I've been in business all my life. I started companies. One of the companies I owned had actually $10 billion worth of debt. I never could go to an investor, and I could never go to a lender and say, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have no business plan, but give me your money. It wouldn't happen. Nobody would give me their money. I've been up here 4 years. I'm on budget. We don't do budgets. I mean, that's just hard to believe. We have no budget meetings to do budgets. Let's look. The process we're going through does not work. $31.5 trillion worth of debt. Right? $31.5 trillion worth of debt. Unbelievable increase in debt year after year after year. We're at 40-year high inflation. Everybody acts like, oh, gosh, inflation is down to 7%. 7%. Wages aren't going up 7%. If you look since Biden got elected, inflation's at least up at 14%, maybe even more if you talk to a typical business person. So the process we're going through does not work. We need to have real budgets. And by the way, you can balance a budget. You guys do it in your personal life. Businesses do it. I was governor of Florida. We walked in. They had not balanced their budget in 20 years. Actually, like, oh, yeah, we balanced our budget. No, they just kept borrowing money. We actually balanced the budget every year and actually paid off a third of the state debt. The way we did it is we went through every line in the budget and we said, what's important now? We made choices. Up here, the only choice is to spend more money. So we're going to get an omnibus bill, okay, in the next few days. We don't know how much money is going to be in it. We don't know what's going to be in it. We don't know what's going to be attached to it. It's been reported that there's 7,500 earmarks in it. 7,500 earmarks, billions and billions of dollars. Do you think anybody can go back home and talk to their voters and say, I voted for a bill, I have no ideas in it? That's what we're going to be expected to do. I'm not going to do it. What we should do is exactly what Senator Lee said. Let's postpone this vote until the first quarter. To give the House Republican leadership an opportunity to come up with a budget, come up with a plan. They've said that's what they would like. They've been clear. That's what they would like. They're not participating in this omnibus process right now because they walked away from it because they can see it's not good for this country. So my goal is let's act responsibly. Let's remember, 7%, 8%, 9%, whatever it is. Inflation is bad for people. $31 trillion of debt is bad for people. And let's change what we're doing because what we're doing is not working. With that, I think we can all take any questions anybody has. Do you have a question?
So, Senator, you tweeted that you would oppose Omnibus, but I'm curious, would you also block an expedited CR as well?
We're going to go through and see. We don't even know. We actually do to this. Maybe y'all have heard something. I have no idea when we're going to vote on. I don't know even what the process is. Nothing's coming, as far as I know, nothing's coming over from the House. Think about this. This is government gets shut down Friday night, and we've not heard what the plan is. But this isn't just. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So we'll make it. In my case, I'll make a decision as we see what's going on. I know we still have to do the NDA. We still have the CR, and then we still have the omnibus.
Let me quick respond to that question because it's a question about process. And that's quite honestly what the folks negotiating this want you to concentrate on, the process, as opposed to the numbers. And so what I would love to have reporters start doing is educate yourself on the numbers, then start asking those who are negotiating the omnibus, why is $5.4 trillion from the COVID relief, why did that get stuck into mandatory spending? How much of that is just locked in now because it's mandatory? Again, we're always said, well, we can't do much on the discretionary side because it's all mandatory spending, so let's ignore that. Let that drive up our debt to over $31 trillion, mortgage our kids' future, because all we can concentrate on this. And then when we're concentrating on this, we don't even get to know what this is until we're asked to vote on it. So I would really love the reporters in this room right now to gather and think of a lot of questions for leadership and for the people negotiating this and start asking some of these questions. What's the $5.4 trillion? How much that goes away if the state of emergency ends? When will the state of emergency end? I mean, there are some really important questions that have to be asked in terms of how we are mortgaging our kids' future. Above and beyond, and again, I'm not trying to be insulting in terms of process, but that's exactly why this is set up this way. So we from on the little things, the little spending amount. Let's celebrate because we maybe prevented $25 billion from being spent when we're talking about in total spending $6,000 billion. So start looking at the big picture. Start concentrating on the numbers and start asking the people, the powers to be, the people in charge of all this that are mortgaging our kids' future, some of these hard questions the American public needs to ask them.
Have you all seen have you guys seen the top number yet? No. Have you seen how many earmarks are in it? Have you seen any parts of it? Do you know what is attached to it? And we're all supposed to vote on this by what, Wednesday?
Your point's well taken, but since we've got you guys in the room right now and not leadership, I have to ask another tactical question. Senator Lee, you talked about this being extortion, basically, tactically, to force your hand on this bill.
It is.
Why not turn that around and say, we're not going to support a time agreement. We need to kick this thing into next year, or force the issue this week, as opposed to giving everybody another week to drag their feet and put, force the extortion on your position.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the process that we started last night by offering up this continuing resolution that would give us a few weeks. And again, it's very important to emphasize that CR, the one I introduced, or anyone like it, still wouldn't preclude them from doing an omnibus. I'm not likely to vote for it for the reasons I've mentioned, but still wouldn't preclude that. It's just that it would allow it to move forward without the extortive threat. So no one has offered a persuasive, compelling answer to me on that question. And until such time as they do, I'm going to continue to throw that up as the kind of approach that I think we should take. It doesn't have to be that exact formulation. It could be that. I'm open to a slightly longer or a slightly shorter window than I described, or weekly CRs automatically renewing unless Congress acts otherwise. But the point is just that there's no reason to create this artificial deadline. Now, those who do it usually say we don't like CRs. CRs are bad, and we can't extend the date. We can't extend the amount of time on which we're operating under a continuing resolution. Well, that's rich. And the reason it's rich is because we've been operating under a continuing resolution this fiscal year since September 30th. 2.5 months. What I'm proposing is just a few weeks. And so if they're now proposing, we can do a week CR, but no more than that. Why is that the magic number? So 2.5 months plus 1 week is okay, but a few weeks beyond that is not. That's completely uncompelling. And I'd love to hear their answer to that. They have yet to provide
no
one.
Conversation
Right.
since the end of September.
None.
Let me quick add. So when you're all reporting on this, I hope you report that at least these 3 senators who supported Senator Lee's proposal for CR. We don't like CRs. It is a bad way of, it just describes dysfunction. But we're all willing to support a CR that takes us into, I think February 7th was the date.
February 4th.
So don't be blaming us for a government shutdown. We're happy to accommodate that. Okay, lay the blame at the people who set up this grotesque and coercive process.
Our approach diminishes the threat of a shutdown. Theirs enhances it deliberately. So.
Can I follow up on that? What I don't hear from any of you, and I just stop me if I'm wrong, is any appetite from any of the 3 of you to pursue a shutdown to make this point.
No,
is that right?
we do not want a shutdown.
Okay.
That is the opposite of what we want. That's why we're proposing the approach that we have, because it
It'll be their
de-escalates.
choice. It'll be their choice.
Yes, ma'am.
I
Go ahead.
wanted to follow up on earmarks. You guys mentioned it, and what we have seen, it seems like there's about $16 billion in earmarks. I think a lot of Americans would be surprised that these are still allowed. And this is, by the way, both Democrats and a whole lot of Republicans that would benefit from this. What is your reaction to $16 billion so far in earmarks in this spending bill?
Well, we have a Republican conference policy position in the Senate that's opposed to earmarks. So I find it surprising that there is eagerness on the part of Republicans in the Senate for whatever earmarks they support, and for whatever earmarks they don't support that are in there. Their support for the bill is odd and oddly irreconcilable with that policy position. Yeah.
You went on the floor yesterday and you asked for UC for a CR to go until February 4th. You were denied that UC. So when you were asked to give your consent tomorrow for a 1-week CR, will you give your consent, or will you also deny what was denied to you?
As I've told many of you in the past, I typically don't signal in advance what procedural objections I might raise to a late-breaking UC request. But I will say this: I'm going to continue to advocate for a CR that will take away the shutdown threat, so that Congress can act clear-headed in a clear-headed fashion, and not under the extortive threat. Now, what that might culminate in, I don't know. But again, my effort here is to avoid a shutdown and to de-escalate that issue. This is to prevent a shutdown. If they reject that, what they are doing is literally enhancing, magnifying significantly at a calculated time of year the risk of a shutdown, and that's wrong.
I think we're supporting what the Republicans in the House want, by the way.
And by the way, there's no equivalency to those two unanimous consent requests. One literally is designed to allow a more thoughtful process, avoid a shutdown, and just have a less dysfunctional process. The other one is designed to coerce a very dysfunctional process that would result in us trying to take a vote on something we haven't seen or read and have no idea about. So there's really no equivalency between the approaches. Ours is very reasonable. Doesn't preclude them from negotiating an omnibus sometime in the next few weeks. Theirs is meant to coerce us, to force members to vote on something they've never even seen. Totally different.
Why would you agree to their unreasonable request when they wouldn't agree to your reasonable request? It seems like it's
Well, we're not saying we're going to.
Senator, Senator Rubio released a bill that would ban TikTok from operating in the U.S. Just wondering any of your thoughts on that, and if you think folks up here on the Hill are taking potential national security threats from TikTok seriously.
I support banning TikTok.
I haven't read the bill yet. It's worth looking at. I hate TikTok for all sorts of reasons, and from some of my friends who are on the Intel committee, I'm hearing disturbing reports about some security threats that it can prevent. So it's worth considering.
Do you think that that's something that there could be legislation about in the next Congress?
Yeah.
It's not bipartisan.
I do.
Senator, for anyone who wants to answer this, I'm wondering actually why you think that more of your colleagues aren't in the room with you right now. Are Senate Republicans kind of tacitly admitting that House Republicans just aren't ready for a spending negotiation early next year?
Those who are making that point are not doing so tacitly. They're doing so explicitly. And they're doing so explicitly at odds with what House Republicans are saying, including incoming, including Kevin McCarthy, the likely speaker. And so I don't quite understand how their argument works. I don't understand how they can purport to speak for House Republicans when their words are at odds with House Republicans. I don't understand how they claim that what this would produce in the next Congress would be a spending bill that actually spends more than this omnibus would. When, number one, we haven't seen this omnibus. It doesn't yet exist. They haven't bothered even to give us top-line figures, or you. And number two, there's no text. And this is going to be 2,000 or 3,000 pages long, as you all know. 2,000 or 3,000 pages of appropriations bill language. It does not read like a fast-paced novel. And so this really is trying to rush something that is inherently resistant to being rushed. And bad things happen when it's rushed. So I don't, as to why more aren't in here, we got together and decided to hold this. That doesn't mean that we're the only ones who feel this way. I know there are others who agree with us.
We'll take one more question, guys. Yep.
If you were to get a short-term CR taking you into the next Congress, what gains or objectives do you think that Republicans could reasonably achieve in a CR or in an omnibus that aren't being achieved in this current packet?
Well, first of all, it's impossible to say with any degree of specificity on what you're talking about because I haven't seen the bill. No one has seen the bill. The bill doesn't exist. We don't know what the top line is. We don't know how many earmarks are in it. In fact, it was interesting. During our steering lunch discussion today, we heard from a member of our conference who was on the Appropriations Committee, who was the ranking Republican on one of the subcommittees of it, who acknowledged that he hasn't seen it. He doesn't know what's in it. And that's kind of a concern. So anyway, to answer your question, it's impossible to state with any degree of specificity or even much approximation how it would be better than that because we don't know what this is. I do, however, believe two things. Number one, at least, and I'm not even sure that it would result in an omnibus spending bill being acted on only in the next Congress and not this one. If my CR passed, they may or may not still have the votes to pass the omnibus. I really don't know. But at least if it did pass, it wouldn't be passed under the extortive threat of which I speak, which I find so offensive. And number two, I think we can state with a reasonable degree of confidence that if you go from a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, and then you transition into a new Congress in which there is a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, there will be more Republican priorities, and that's likely to range from everything from the level of spending, defense and non-defense alike, to also other substantive policy priorities in it. It's going to be different, and it's more likely to reflect more Republican principles. In fact, I think it's inevitable that that would be the case. There are those in my conference who disagree with that and say the opposite would be true. I struggle with that logic, and that's a gross understatement. I find that an utterly incomprehensible argument to suggest that it could get worse in the next Congress, that it would be more likely to reflect Democratic priorities than the current omnibus, which we still haven't seen.
Let me close this out by kind of combining the answer to both questions. We can't speak for our colleagues, but the fact that there's maybe a smaller group of us kind of speaks to the fact that the coercive process works in terms of getting votes for massive spending. But it doesn't work for the American people in terms of bringing some fiscal sanity to Washington, D.C. So again, we're on the side of fiscal sanity. We're on the side of a process that is transparent so that members and the American public actually understand how the federal government is mortgaging their kids' future. So thank you all for coming.
I love the Santa socks.
Thank you.
And I have to ask, whose picture is on your socks?
JFK.
Okay, I thought that's who it was. For a second, it looked like Reagan from a different movie.